I bet you have done.
And about Recovered Life is I never dreamed that when I started this, that I would meet so many cool people.
Right?
I never really imagined that.
Right. It's one of the.
Was about like and first it started as a group, which still
Mhm.
goes, called Old School right now, every Thursday, men's group. And it was really just about how do we have these deeper conversations and stay engaged. Maybe conversations we're not having, in
Right.
the rooms.
Right.
Wanted to do is that there's a lot of podcasts out there, Kristina, about
Right.
recovery, and I love them. It's because you've shared with me that you've had a similar experience. Is that the one of the things that I got from the Recovered Life and just producing this and being part of this community is that I realized that there's not one way to recovery, that there's
Yes.
many different paths. And I'm going to be honest with you. I was one of those people when I came in, I thought, well, I, I think there's maybe a couple ways, but I haven't seen a whole lot of ways. But talking with people over, over the whole gamut of the shows and the different topics, like Gabriella Jello, who we've
Mhm.
had on several times, who we followed her getting sober, who had never gone to a 12-step meeting, right?
Right.
And I think like when we feature that, one of the downsides for me personally is I've gotten a lot of flack from people, like I said, that said, well, you're anti 12 step group. And I'm
Mm.
not. Like Kristina
No.
knows, like I'm a huge fanboy for 12
Yes.
step groups. Like I love 12 step groups. They saved my life. I think that they're amazing. But one of the things that the show told me that kind of highlighted for me, and I'll tell you, one of the big breakthroughs was Stacey Danford,
Really.
who we had on the show. Yeah, because we
She's
did the whole
amazing.
thing
Yeah.
about addiction
Mhm.
and about trauma, which we're going to talk a little bit later on the show about. That was huge, about character defects, that they might not be character defects, that they might actually be trauma responses. And that was a huge breakthrough for me.
Right. Right. I have had a sneaking suspicion, and I think it's so good that we have an option for people where, 12 steps is not giving them everything that they need, and having these conversations. Look, when the 1930s, we didn't have the ability to look into the brain. And so as we continue to grow in our technology and our knowledge of science, we can and should adjust and start including it. I also had kind of a myopic view of, if you don't get sober in here in this particular way, then your sobriety isn't the same. And I have learned that is incorrect. Through the show, through the network, I've met many people that had their own spiritual awakening. And what I love about Recovered Life is that you're open to all of those ways. And I think that, it's, for me, thinking it was a character defect didn't work. So it was really, really nice to hear that other side of it.
Yeah. And I think, by having these discussions, like I remember back, it was a year ago, I had this conversation with Jamie Whitney, who's
Hmm.
a marriage and family therapist, right? And all about her experience, and she's in recovery. She has long-term recovery. Her experience fighting depression.
Right.
And, I've had so many friends that have fought depression in recovery, and hearing her ideas from a therapist point of view who deals with people that are getting sober, right? It was so great because like having access to contributors with like bigger mind, I almost think that it's almost like TED, like we like in a way, Kristina, you and I were talking about the other day, and it's like we almost created like the TED Talks
Yes.
for recovery, because so many times you just hear one perspective. Like I can't remember when I actually heard a therapist talk about, hey, this is what I practiced through a rehab that didn't work. Right.
Right.
Like she says it. It's like, these are the things that didn't work for me. These are the things that work. One of the things too is the addition of you, Kristina, which has been really great. I
Thank
remember
you.
the first episodes we had, and we did a Recovered Life discussion around them, all regarding codependency. And you made
Right.
this blanket statement that you never met an alcoholic or a drug addict that was in recovery that wasn't a codependent.
Absolutely. And I stand by that today, as well as, I believe that every alcoholic would benefit from, working adult child of alcoholic and dysfunctional families program. And sometimes people don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that side. But for me, getting sober, getting physically sober was not enough. I needed to have information and I needed to go into recovery for codependency. And I
Yes.
yet to this day have never met an alcoholic who doesn't have codependent relationships. And it's easy for them to think they don't,
Exactly.
right? It's easy for them to think
Exactly.
the partner is the codependent, but it's both.
Well, this is one of the things too. It's like I remember a past episode we had with Kimberly Parham, who talks about, health and recovery and anxiety and how she got over anxiety by applying, fitness, just
Yes.
like you're talking about codependency, I was just looking over my notes here because I was like going through the episodes really. I was like, wow, that's a lot of discussions. Like, one of the things that was really fun at the very, very beginning is I had two people that really were the only people that I had access to. George
Right.
Schneider and Kevin Klein. Pastor Klein was so great, and he's really into metaphysics. And he would come on and we would talk about these really deep topics, right? And
Right.
go so down the rabbit hole. And at that time, no one was watching, right? Like no one was watching it. And I was like, and I remember my friend is like saying, it's like, well, like, are people watching it? I go, no, I don't, they're not now, but I know they will if I keep
Right.
producing the episodes.
Right. And isn't that a service to people? I mean, just the nutrition alone, like I said, we know more now. We realize that serotonin, that your gut is your second brain. And the meetings that I attended would consider that an outside issue. So knowing that we can have access to this information, it really allows us to catapult our recovery and have better lives. I love the recovered life slogan, living your best recovered life, because I think that's exactly what the content is bringing to people.
Yes, thank you. And I do believe it really is about that, right? It's about how do you live your best recovered life? Because let's be honest, Christina, you and I work with people day to day, and
Right.
they're not happy, right? Like
No.
people, there's some people are not happy. Being sober, and even being sober and doing the deal. There's like the whole idea of being a dry drunk, and then there's this whole idea of, well, I'm sober and I'm doing the deal. Like
Right.
I always talk about this is like there's a lot of people stuck in the church basement. They're just
Yes.
stuck, man. They
Yes.
they they really are, and they want to reinvent their lives, but they really don't know how. And one of the things that I saw just through the blessing of being able to do some coaching with
Right.
people, with you, and just this whole coaching thing was been the whole idea about helping people get a breakthrough
Right.
so that they can really live their best recovered life. Because I'm going to tell you the deep dark secret, I think that's in the recovery thing. And you and I talk about it. I'd like your opinion on this, Kristina, because
Okay.
I believe the deep dark secret is there's a lot of people that have long-term time, long-term sobriety, and they're doing the deal. They're being
Hmm.
of service. They're going to the 12-step meetings. They're going to therapy. They're going, but at the end of the day, they're really not happy and living their best recovered life.
I tend to agree. I tend to agree, and I try to tell people there's another way, and having an open discussion allows us to share, the process in a 12-step group. Maybe that works for someone somewhere where you leave it at that. But for me and my clients and my friends, it has always been necessary for us to be able to go deeper and to have that real connection. And that's just part of the human experience. I mean, I think us as our world is starting to realize that connection, deeper connection is the purpose of life. And I can see, and I've never met a group of people that are more willing to learn and challenge their belief systems than people in recovery.
Yeah, I mean, and this is I looking back, I remember having this conversation in May last year with this
Hmm.
gentleman named Parker Boone,
Hmm.
and about how he, lost his dad couldn't stay sober, was like in and out, and found cycling, right? And
Wow.
found that his passion was cycling. And he's created this whole recovery movement around helping people get sober through cycling, right? Like,
Wow.
and it's not therapy. It's not even really peer support.
Right.
It's not 12 step. It's something else, but it works for him. And he's super passionate about it, right? And he's found his path to be able to go and start to live his best recovered life. And what's always great is I see him pop up. We have to have him back on the show because
Okay.
he's such a fun guy. Like, he's so happy that he's able to cycle, that he's sober, that he's helping people. You know what I mean? And it's like, that's really what it's about. Like, people like Zach Mathers, who we interviewed, who's a recovery coach, who changed his whole life and moved to Hawaii. Just totally changed his whole life in recovery. Right.
Had the
This is
courage.
really this amazing transformational stories. But what's interesting about these transformational stories is it's not the story that's interesting as much. It's really how you can apply them in your day-to-day recovery.
So true. And I know it's a bold statement to say that possibly people are not happy, but I think when we start talking about it, when we start sharing, wow, this just isn't enough. There's much more that I need. And watching and having examples like Recovered Life contributors and people who've done it is such a necessary step. Recovering out loud has been, that shift in my recovery has given me so much. Plus, I'm still out there being of service.
Well, people, I think, are afraid to ask this question, am I living? And one of the first questions that we ask people when they come onto Recovered Life, onto the network and community, we ask them, hey, are you living your best recovered life? And if not, why? And I
Right.
think, one of the things that's been so interesting is to see the responses. There's a lot of fear from people. They think like, okay, if I live my best recovered life, if I go, yeah, I've been sober for 10 years or so, but if I go there, if I really stretch myself and get the job that I want, or the relationship that I want, or the hobby that I want, or if I really take that trip or do something, then I'm asking too much because I'm
Right.
lucky that I'm sober, right? We hear this.
Yes.
Lucky
Yes.
that I'm sober and I don't want to press my luck. I don't really want to talk about codependency because I don't want to relapse,
Right.
right?
Right.
Come on, let's be honest. That's
It's
what people
totally
say.
true. It's totally true. And I think that robs us of our joy. And it's painful to go through some of these things. But in order to have really great relationships and have the confidence and understanding of self-worth, we have to talk about these things. Yes, we were given grace that we got sober, but I don't believe that means that we're never supposed to want anything new. And if you are like me, you weren't told that it was okay to want something. You were told that you better work really hard and you better just be grateful for what you have. And that keeps people stunted and, not having these deep relationships. So I think that when you bring on experts that love cycling, that love skateboarding, it gives people permission and a roadmap to, I can actually have a life better than what I even dream of.
Well, absolutely, that is the key. And that is the key. And I know that that's the whole premise of your coaching, and that's what you
Mhm.
do, right? And that's why, and I would be remiss not to mention one of the big changes that we've had on Recovered Life is just the increase of content
Right.
that we've been producing, and you as a co-host, which has been amazing.
Thank you.
And it's been such a blessed addition to the show because you give another perspective on things. I sometimes, even though I'm a very optimistic person, sometimes I'll come across very pessimistic, right?
Right.
And you always seem to be very optimistic. I'm like, wait a second, like I don't think we can cure alcoholism with this. Like I'm always very, whatever the
Yes.
topic is. Sometimes I take the contrarian standpoint, but that's a good thing. One of the good things is to have your perspective and what you've been added to the show and all the other contributors that have come on and added their expertise. The one thing I wanted to mention, though, too, in this little segment that I love and what we're going to do in the future, a little bit of glimpse. Kristina and I want to talk about what we're going to do in the future here with
Yes.
the Recovered Life show. But one of the things that was a real blessing that we had on is we've had people on the show that are not suffering from addiction.
Yes.
And this has been great. And at first people were like, well, why are you having on, like I had on the scientist, I want to go back to this. I had Lubin Doval on, who is a PhD pharmacologist, right? And talking about opioid addiction. And people are like, well, yeah, but he's not an addiction. No, that's what made it great, because he
Yes.
was able to dispel a lot of myths that were with opioid addiction. Like, one, he's like, the reason why people question, treatment and are so nervous that are in recovery to get into scientific medical opioid treatment is because they treat opioid addiction with opioid addiction. Right?
Yes.
They give you opioids. They treat opioids,
With more
opioids
opiates.
are the treat. Yeah. So it's like, to get these like perspectives from these experts, especially the people who are working, deep into the recovery, like Eric Paskin,
Mm-hmm.
who is the founder of Restore Health and Treatment Center, his whole perspective on treatment and working in treatment if you're sober, right? It's these like little niche topics that I love, because we're able to bring out really what people are thinking that are
Right.
in recovery.
Right. And they may not dare say, because there's this golden rule that we don't complain or ask questions about recovery. And they will simply say, I know that we talk about trauma and we're going to talk about it in the second half, but having Stacey Danford's perspective about, wait a minute, maybe this isn't a character defect, maybe it's a trauma
Yes.
response, helps us look outside of the fishbowl and see, oh my goodness. Also, the rest of the world is interested in transformation too. And I love that I will go into a business room, let's say on Clubhouse, and I'll hear things like, let's read this book about the surrender experiment. And it works for everyone. And I do believe, with 30% of people in this United States having a substance abuse disorder, that alcoholism really affects everyone. You know somebody who has a problem with it, or you're married to somebody who has a problem with it, or your family dealt with it. I do think it touches most everyone's life in some way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the paradox here with doing content about recovery. People in recovery all respond, like when I have on Frederick Sharag, right?
Mhm.
Who is this brilliant public speaker, super smart businessman. And, he talks about his transformation and finally getting it when he
Mhm.
was basically in a public detox that was sponsored by a church, flipping through a bin, trying to find used underwear to wear because
Right.
he'd lost everything again, right? Like, people respond to that. But the reality is that recovery isn't only for the people who have the alcohol, drug, codependency, food issue, right?
No.
Or sex addiction or anything like that. It's for the people around them, which I know as an interventionist is a huge part of what you do, right? Like, it's really for the people around them. And I think there's so many people around people and so much bad information out there. Let's be
Yes.
honest, Kristina,
Yes.
really bad information. And some of this you hear in 12-step communities.
Yes.
Like, we
Yes.
were talking about one the other day, this advice that was given from somebody that we know that has long-term sobriety. We're like, I can't believe somebody would even give that. That advice is not really good,
Right.
right?
Right. It's
But
very,
quote, that person has authority or whatever. So it's this whole thing about what happens to the people around you. And this is the thing that people that recover from a substance abuse problem and have addiction problems don't always see.
right.
You
Right.
know, that's why
Mhm.
I've had authors on that have had husbands or partners or wives that have been in recovery, right? That have gone through and they've write about their side of it,
Yes.
because I think it's important for us to hear what other people are going through that are around us.
Yes, yes. I mean, that's what being in relationship is all about. And as an interventionist, I mean, we know very clearly that it's a family system that needs to be treated, not just the alcoholic. And I think that the more that gets known, the more people will actually embrace the recovery process and get help. I mean, it helps.
You are so right. And I mean, I think, we wanted to kind of address here at the end of the segment, like what is to come? Like, what are we going to be doing with the Recovered Life show as this continues on, as we go in through the rest of 2022? And I'd like
Yes.
to say, more Damon and more Kristina all the
Yes.
time, which is
Yes.
good. We're adding to the show, guys, Recovered Life discussions. And these we've been having on a platform called Clubhouse. And we've had, we have hours of these a week, a minimum of 4 to
Yes.
5 hours that
Yes.
people don't even know that, like that listen to the show regularly, that we're also having discussions about these topics with a really vibrant, amazing community that we built on Clubhouse, and are turning those into shows. So
Yes.
we're gonna be giving even more content from people who are actually, recovering from codependency, recovering from alcohol and drug addiction. We've had intimacy and sex addiction experts all on these platforms. So more of that to come. I really love the Recovered Life discussions because I think it brings this dimension, Kristina, to the topics. It's not just two people that are sober talking about a topic.
So
It's
true.
really that topic in action.
Right. And you can watch it unfold in real time. It's not a lecture. It's literally a discussion. And people have asked me, how do they get the discussions? They have to miss a room. How do they get it? And I'm very excited that we're going to start adding it to the content on Recovered Life, because I think that it will help many, many people, not just the 100 people that are able to come.
Yeah, absolutely. And and the thing is that another thing that we're doing that's going to be good, and this is with the addition of you as the co-host, Kristina, is just more content in general and
Right.
more guests. One of the challenges that we had is, as we used to do a show every week or 2 weeks or sometimes every 3 weeks when we first started, now we're doing hours and hours of content a week, which we all put on Recovered Life, so you can get all of that content there. But one of the things that we really wanted to try to do was bring on more experts, more
Right.
guests. So as these shows go and we do more and more lives and we're on, our goal, guys, is that we could be able to be the CNN of recovery and be on air, 5, 6, 7 days a week with some really great programming for you to help you live your best recovered life. So just a shout out. And I know you want to say thank you as well, Kristina, but to everybody, thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
supporting the show. We get a lot of downloads now and people are with us and they're commenting. We so appreciate it. It's sometimes you just feel we're putting out content and no one's watching, but we know people are watching
They
now,
are.
which is really great.
They are. It's a beautiful experience, and I am so grateful the people that do watch, and I'm so grateful to you for letting me be part of it. This has changed my life.
Well, thank you, Kristina Dennis. More to come with Recovered Life today, and more to come with the Recovered Life show. Thank you both from Kristina Dennis and myself. So we've got another episode coming up, another segment coming up. But
Right.
before we do, I wanted to just touch on something really quick here, Kristina.
Okay.
You have got a really amazing, we were talking about codependency. You have this amazing 3-day challenge that is 100% free on Recovered Life, called Can't Say No. And I wanted to let everybody know about that because it is just so great. We've had so many comments from people that this has been the primer to identify that they were maybe in a codependent relationship and why they weren't feeling great when they woke up in the morning, right?
Right.
That
Right.
even though they were doing the deal, they were like, oh my gosh, I can't set boundaries well. This Can't Say No is a 3-day course, and you can take it. It's a 3-day challenge for free. You get a great email every day from Kristina Dennis, and there's this amazing little bonus gift in there that's worth the whole thing. I got to tell you, it just makes it even more worthwhile. And everybody can get that at info.recoveredlife.us. All you have to do is go to info.recoveredlife.us, and you can get that 100% for free today. So, Kristina, we're going to be back in about 15 seconds.
All right.
We've got a great new segment coming up on the Recovered Life Show.
You're listening to the Recovered Life Show.
Welcome back. I am so happy to have you on the Recover Life Show, and we have a wonderful segment coming up to talk about trauma and addiction. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody to visit info.recoveredlife.us. Sign up for the membership. It's completely free. There is a donation button that you can leave us a donation that allows us to continue the show, but also that the show is being brought to you by Recovered Life contributors and followers like you, viewers like you. So continue to like, share, follow, and leave us a comment. Are you ready for this next segment, Damon Frank?
I am ready, Kristina. This is going to be a good one. This is going to be a good one. We talked a little bit about trauma through in the last segment, and we talk about it a lot now. It's a word that I never used, I would say, in the first 25 years of my recovery.
Really?
But now this is, not really. Let's be honest. Trauma wasn't a thing.
No.
Trauma wasn't a thing in the 90s. Early 2000s. It's like people really didn't talk about it in 12-step groups. You didn't hear about it a lot in therapy, a little bit in therapy, but it really wasn't that level of conversation that we have now about it.
Right. And I still think that there's way more that needs to be explored, and before we get started, I want to explain what the definition of trauma is. And it's so interesting to me when I read this in the article that we are discussing. Trauma is anytime someone fears for their safety. Isn't that interesting? They're experiencing trauma, because I think sometimes people think trauma is, the big T stuff, and they might look at their life and not understand why, the trauma word applies to them, or they think that it's really not a big deal. And so I loved when I saw that in the article and wanted to share it, because what is trauma? Well, it's when anyone feels unsafe in their life. They are experiencing what the word trauma means.
Well, I love that. I love that you mentioned that, because I would not have thought of that. I'm going to be honest, because when you asked that question, the definition of trauma, I was just thinking, well, it's a pattern. It's something that you don't necessarily want. It's, I wouldn't think about safety. Why safety, Kristina? What's the link between the safety and the trauma?
Well, because what it does is an emotional response that is evoked in fear, so that it actually leaves an alarm in your body, which is what PTSD is. It's, unless we go in and heal the trauma, then we will be carrying it around with us. And some ideas of what a trauma is, in case people are wondering: a car accident, bullying, violence, sexual assault, unstable home life, natural disaster, intense pain. These are the things that cause trauma: chronic disease, verbal abuse, and parental neglect. And I think that we think natural disaster or car accident, but we don't realize that parental neglect or verbal abuse actually creates a trauma response in our body and our nervous system.
That's interesting, because it makes me look at trauma differently. And I did read the article, and just, I'm going to put this up on screen. Anybody who's listening on the podcast, this is from Agape Treatment Center. And it was put out in actually November 20th, 2019 by Agape Treatment. And it goes through defining what that trauma is. And it lists those things, which I think was great. But one of the things that it does list in the article is the study that was done by Kaiser Permanente.
Yes.
And I'd love to talk about that real quick, because this really kind of brought it home that there's got to be some sort of link. At first, I didn't understand it. And, that, okay, what is the link between, okay, I have trauma, but why statistically are people much more likely to become addicted to a substance?
Right.
If they suffer from that trauma?
Well, it's coping strategies, right? First, if you don't recognize that you have a trauma, how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to address it? How do you heal it if you don't recognize it? And I want to point out, everyone on this planet has had a trauma in the last 3 years. if that's the definition of trauma, all of us have been afraid of our safety with COVID. And so this article is a little outdated. The Kaiser Permanente study is highlighted in a book that says The Body Keeps the Score. Have you ever heard of that book?
I have, and we need to do an episode just on, and there's experts I know that are out there that's all they do is The Body Keeps the Score. And this is the big thing on Recovered Life discussions. People bring this up constantly, that book and program.
Yeah, it's an intense book. I've read it twice, and I have to tell you, just even reading it, made my nervous system alarmed. There was a point where some of the studies, and it has to do with this large study of people where they actually really saw, and child abuse or traumatic events should be something that we're talking about in this country all the time, because although we're going to focus on the fact that you're 3 times more likely to become addicted to alcohol, there are so many different things, criminal activities, all kinds of, pain, divorce, that are all attached to that. And it's something that we don't talk a lot about, but as I know, when you're in recovery from a substance abuse disorder, you can't run from this. Eventually you have to stop, look at it, and work with a trauma-informed coach or therapist.
Well, this is, what was interesting about this article in the Kaiser Permanente study is I'm just going to read it right off the screen here. It says that that the study found that a child who experiences 4 or more traumatic events is 5 times more likely than his or her counterpart to suffer from alcohol use disorder. Wow.
Right.
That's like 5 times more if a child has had 4 or more traumatic events.
Right.
That's great. And bullying, look, now there's a focus on bullying. Bullying, that could be 5 traumatic events in a week.
It could. And, parental neglect, verbal abuse can be prevalent. And I think people think that it's going, I lived through that. I understand. I forgave them. I've moved on. But the physical ramifications of PTSD are impossible to shrink unless you actively work on it. We've had a show on EMDR, which has been proven scientifically to help, but the alarm that stays in your body makes it very, very difficult to be able to move on with your life. Every decision you're making is being trauma informed. Every decision is based on fearing for your safety, and it's very subconscious.
Well, one of the things I was going to interject real quick when you were talking about the subconscious part of it is that one of the things that I have gathered from doing the show and talking with experts about trauma and just diving into this thing is not only is there a link between the two, but I believe, and I'd like your opinion on this, Kristina, because this might be a little controversial.
Okay.
I would think that it's really kind of ignored in most treatment.
Yes.
It's ignored. But and it's called, and I know we did this episode with Stacey Danford, and we've talked about EMDR and EDMR or whatever. We talked about all of these different things that actually address trauma are now more of the breakthrough treatments. Is that before they were just all kind of lumped into you're a bad person.
Right.
You don't have willpower.
Yes.
And you have character defects.
Right.
It usually was dumped into one of those 3 camps, and none of those are necessarily correct when we look at how trauma plays such a huge role in addiction.
They absolutely are not. And without addressing the trauma, you're still carrying all that pain, and how difficult it is to remain. We may learn that alcohol is an improper coping strategy and it doesn't work for us. But if we don't address the trauma, we just apply that to another addiction, another way to distract ourselves. And we talk about that all the time in 12-step group. Now I'm a workaholic. Now now I can't stop buying shoes. And so we trade one addiction for another, one that's maybe safer for us and that isn't going to take our life as soon, but it doesn't really allow us to feel good in our body and to feel calm and worthy. And that's what trauma steals from us. It steals our joy.
Well, this is what we call the treadmill of isms, or stacking, which is,
Yes.
in coaching and therapy, they talk about stacking. It's like having a root addiction. Maybe that's alcoholism or drug abuse or, sexual addiction, but then you can't get off the phone in inappropriate times, or
Hmm.
you're addicted to video games, which we did a segment on that, right? These are this stacking of addictions on top of each other to
Yes.
create this layer of protection,
Yes.
really, to try to feel safe from that trauma response. And I get this. I mean, I look back now, I think, I've made a bold statement a lot. I think trauma is probably the most significant, the link between trauma and addiction is probably the most significant thing that has happened in recovery, in my
Yes.
opinion, in the last 50 years.
Yes, yes. And when we do comparative suffering, we'll say, well, so and so went through more than I did, and they're not an alcoholic. We are not helping ourselves. We're not helping the other person, too. That comparative suffering really steals the ability to grieve what's happened. And it's very, very important for anyone who is in recovery to also look at their trauma and do it with an expert, walk through it so that they can get to that freedom that they're looking from. That treadmill image is exactly what it can feel like.
Well, the whole idea of, and I think you said something that was so key there, the whole idea of the amount of substance
Hmm.
being the determining factor of whether you having an addiction problem is a non-addicted person's perspective
Yes.
on addiction. It's not an addiction perspective, because it's
Right.
never the amount. Look, I mean, one of the things that's funny is like, friends that I've had are family members that are not alcoholics, right?
Right.
They will always ask me, they'll go, hey, my friend Bob, he had 4 glasses of wine and he normally has 3, right? And they're obsessed with the amount of alcohol, but
Right.
the amount has nothing to do. It's the reaction you have to the substance that's the issue. It's not it has nothing to do with the amount, in my opinion. I mean, yes,
I,
amount, obviously, with harm reduction, there are dangerous levels of drugs and alcohol, but it's really what happens to you after you consume that substance and everything
uh,
that goes on with that.
Damon, you are so right. And, I'll be completely transparent. When I first got into recovery, it was about the amount, like,
Yeah.
well, when they're asking me questions, how many drinks do you drink a week? How many, never did I once think maybe this is because I'm in complete terror and I'm trying to make it possible for me to live on this earth. Not until I started getting into recovery did I realize that. Now I have some extreme trauma in my background, and I think it almost made it a little easier for me to realize I had to address it. But I remember about 4 years into sobriety, and everything had been cleaned up. My money issues were clean. I was working a great job. I had physical sobriety, and I remember feeling like I couldn't breathe in my own life. And I ended up finding a therapist, telling her my story. All the steps in the world were not going to allow me to do what I needed to do to address my own trauma. And I needed to work with someone who could explain to me that this was horrific harm that had been done to me, and that I needed to feel it, I needed to face it, and I needed to understand it wasn't my fault.
Yeah, and this is the thing that I think people need to really pay attention to, that are going into recovery and have loved ones in recovery that are going through the
Hmm.
process. Your local church recovery group, which might work wonders and be totally valuable, right?
Right,
To
of
your
course.
recovery and really launch you in, might not be the place that can be able to see, identify, and treat trauma. And
Exactly.
this is an important thing, because, look, and we're coming out, Kristina and I are not doctors, and we're not
No.
diagnosing anybody's trauma, right? Because that's an individual thing. If you feel that you're suffering from trauma, you need to go see a professional because it
Yes.
is dangerous. And, look, we've seen people relapse. We were talking about this today about people that have done the deal, done everything that
Hmm.
they've been asked to do, and then wake up one day and say, you know what, I can't handle it anymore. And they go out. And it seems
Right.
to be out of nowhere. Well, a lot of that is trauma. A
It
lot of that is
is.
unresolved trauma that they felt that maybe some program or thing what was treating, but really it wasn't treated. It just kept going behind the background. Those scripts just keep running.
They sure do. And, it's that in ACOA, we work on the inner child. And since most of the trauma that we experience happens in childhood, the entire idea of that program is to be able to go and take an inventory about your childhood and to be honest about it for the first time, maybe ever. And doing it within the group setting still won't replace what you need to do with a professional. I agree. It is something to be taken seriously.
Yeah, and it's scary the amount of misinformation that's out there about trauma. The
Mhm.
more and more I dive into it, the more that link to trauma and addiction becomes more and more prevalent.
Yes.
And, I think we're going to have many more shows about this. We've got experts lined up,
Mhm.
doctors and people that are going to come in and talk about, the medical side of that and the psychiatric side of that and how to move out of that trauma and things that they recommend. So more to come on that on the Recovered Life show. Amazing episode, Kristina. This has
It
been a lot
was.
of fun. Great celebrating with you. We're going to be back Friday for another great episode, but I did want to mention we've got a couple of Recovered Life discussions still going on this week that people can jump into.
Yes, setting healthy boundaries is today's Recovered Life discussion. It's a wonderful, wonderful discussion. We talk
Love
about
that. Love that
relationships,
discussion.
and we actually, for some people, it's their first time looking at their codependent behaviors.
And then
But
tomorrow we're jumping into Unstuck, which is a discussion that I have at 10 a.m. Pacific.
9.
9 a.m. Pacific. I don't even know my time. 9 a.m. Pacific, all about how to get unstuck in your recovery. So, guys, you can find out all of that and more. You can find it at recoveredlife.us. You can become a member 100% totally for free. It's the
Yep.
best game in town. All you have to do is go to recoveredlife.us. It takes less than a minute, and you'll be in the community having conversations. Kristina Dennis, episode 100, Wednesday, April 20th,
Yes.
2022, in the can. We'll see you Friday.
Bye.
Keep the conversation going. Join Recovered Life, a community of like-minded people who are looking to live their best recovered lives. Membership is free, and you can apply at recoveredlife.us.